Today, we are diving into a really fascinating puzzle from our deep past. We're going to look at two huge, seemingly unrelated things. First, the memory of a world-ending flood that pops up in cultures everywhere. And second, the sudden global impulse to build absolutely massive monuments. So the question is, could they actually be connected?
I mean, think about it for a second. On one hand, you have stories from pretty much every ancient culture about the world just being washed away. And on the other, you have the very first attempts to build things that would last forever. So here's the core question we're exploring. Could the memory of a world-destroying event have directly inspired humanity's first big push to build a permanent, ordered world? Let's start by digging into the stories themselves.
All right, so first up, the stories. And it's honestly kind of mind-blowing how so many different cultures, ones that had zero contact with each other, all told a surprisingly similar story about a great world-ending flood. So if you look at these three foundational myths, you see a clear pattern emerging, right? In every single one, a deity gets fed up with a wicked civilization and decides to hit the reset button with a flood. But there's always one righteous hero, whether it's Manu, Utnapishtim, or Noah, who gets chosen to build a boat, save life, and start the world all over again. It's this recurring theme of judgment, total destruction, and then ultimately a second chance.
And this quote really gets to the heart of it. The focus isn't just on the disaster. At its core, it's about the desperate human will to survive, even against impossible odds. The fact that this cultural hero figure shows up again and again and again, well, that suggests we're looking at something much deeper than just a coincidence. It feels more like the echo of a shared traumatic memory.
And seriously, this story is everywhere. The Greeks told a version with Deucalion. The Egyptians had a wild myth where the god Ra sends a flood of beer dyed to look like blood to wipe people out. You find variations in Ojibwe and Pawnee traditions here in North America, and even in Australian Aboriginal folklore. A theme this widespread really makes you wonder, maybe these stories are an echo of a real world-altering event.
So if these myths are maybe rooted in a real event, what does the science have to say? Let's switch gears and look at the geological record to see if we can find the source of this ancient memory.
Okay, so the end of the last ice age, which kicked off around 18,000 years ago, was one of the most dramatic periods of climate change in human history. You had these massive ice sheets melting, releasing just an unbelievable amount of water into the oceans. Events on this timeline, like the catastrophic flooding of the Black Sea Basin around 7,600 years ago, would have been absolutely world-ending for anyone living on its shores. You can easily see how that could inspire a powerful myth. The scale of this change is just hard to wrap your head around. We're talking about a global sea level rise of about 130 meters. That's over 400 feet. Entire coastlines were literally redrawn. Places that were once home to thriving communities, like the river valley that's now buried under the Persian Gulf, were just completely swallowed by the ocean. For the people who lived through this, it must have truly felt like the world was ending. But here's the thing. A slow, gradual rise in sea level over thousands of years doesn't quite match the violent, apocalyptic nature of the flood myths. To find something that fits that kind of trauma, we need to look at an event that was far more sudden and way more terrifying. Let's talk about a period that scientists call the Younger Dryas. It's got a kind of funny name. It's from an Arctic wildflower that suddenly started growing all over Europe again. Why? Because the warming trend at the end of the Ice Age just came to a screeching halt, and the world was plunged back into a deep freeze.
And to really understand how severe this was, just look at the ice core data from Greenland. Temperatures there plummeted by as much as 10 degrees Celsius in a really short amount of time. This wasn't some gentle cooling trend. It was a violent climate shock, a sudden, savage winter that hung around for more than 1,000 years.
So, what in the world could trigger such a sudden, dramatic reversal of the planet's climate? Well, the leading scientific theory points to a pretty surprising culprit. The consensus now points to a massive, catastrophic flood. But here's the twist. It wasn't salt water from the ocean. It was fresh water from a melting glacier. The prime suspect is a gigantic glacial lake in North America called Lake Agassiz, which suddenly burst its ice dam.
This absolutely biblical flood of cold, fresh water poured into the North Atlantic, and it's believed that this shut down the Great Ocean Conveyor Belt, the AMOC, which basically acts as the planet's heat pump. So, in effect, it switched off the Northern Hemisphere's entire heating system, triggering the Younger Dryas. And there you have it, a real scientifically plausible Great Flood, one that didn't drown the world in water but plunged it back into ice and chaos. The trauma of an event like this, a world of floods, freezes, and terrifying unpredictability, it would have scarred the human psyche for generations. Which finally brings us to the second half of our puzzle, the rise of monuments. Because it's right in the aftermath of this great instability, just as the world finally warmed up and stabilized, that we see something totally new emerge all across the globe. From the ziggurats in Mesopotamia to the pyramids in Egypt, humanity starts building on a scale that had never been seen before. And these things were so much more than just buildings. They were a powerful statement. In a world that had just proven it could be washed away or frozen over in a heartbeat, these monuments were an assertion of permanence. They were stairways to connect with the gods, launch pads for the afterlife, and maybe above all, they were an attempt to impose human order on a dangerously chaotic world. This growing obsession with permanence is captured perfectly in the evolution of the pyramid itself. You can actually see the idea develop in stone. They started with simple mud brick tombs called mastabas. Then they leveled up, stacking them to create the first monumental stone building in history, the step pyramid. After a few interesting attempts, like the bent pyramid, they finally perfected the form, creating that eternal, immovable mountain of stone that we all know as the true pyramid. So when you put all the pieces together, a really compelling picture emerges. The world-ending flood of myth, likely rooted in the very real climate chaos of the Younger Dryas, might have created this deep psychological need for stability. And the world-building, pyramids, ziggurats, and all the other monuments, they were humanity's defiant, creative, and just awe-inspiring response. They might be two sides of the same ancient coin. This ancient story of a civilization scarred by abrupt climate change and their incredible response, it really echoes powerfully today, doesn't it? And it leaves us with a profound question. In our own era of environmental instability, they chose to build for eternity. So what will we choose to build?